welcome to Tech of the Day. Today we're going to talk about Azure boards. This is a continuous video from AZ-400 series, and this is the first topic we are going to talk about. Uh, I'm going to cover all the topics in this series related to AZ-400 certification exam. So if you guys are interested and if you guys want to do any certification, then you are more than welcome to continue here, and of course it's free. So it doesn't cost you. Let's go. So in this series, before going further, let me just give you a primer for agile and waterfall methodologies we used, because this is really important to know, to get all the concepts clear. And if you already know these things, you can go to next videos if you guys want, but yeah, I would just suggest to it doesn't cost much time, so depends on you, whatever you prefer. So we are used to have waterfall, and we are also using agile now. So what was waterfall? I have already discussed this in my previous video as well, but so I won't repeat the same things, but I just wanted to give you a primer before getting started with the Azure boards. So basically in waterfall, what we had these steps: requirements, design, implementation, testing, and maintenance. So this also contains delivery, but it doesn't have. So what we had, so we gathered the requirements from the client, we design the application, and we implement the design, and then we test the application, develop application. uh, then once it's tested, we deploy it, and we get some feedback from the client. Mostly there are many feedbacks actually, because your final product is shown to the client at the end of the cycle. So your whole application is developed, and then you show it to the client, and then client looks at it, and okay, he's sometimes not happy with it, sometimes he's happy, but most of the times it doesn't meet it his expectations. So then the same cycle might be repeated again, and it's time consuming, because he requested a project A, and you delivered a project B. So simply, so let's say he requested like this. My drawing is really bad. And you delivered something like this. So to avoid these things, what we came up with agile methodology, and we divided all the requirements into small chunks. So we said like, okay, we're gonna divide task a whole project A into small tasks. um, Before that, we divide them into sprints, and then sprints are divided into tasks. So well, that's a bit more detailed. We will discuss that in next video, but simply we divide the big chunk into smaller chunks, and then we implement the same thing for those smaller chunks, and we insert um, one more step here, which is analyze. So you you analyze the problem, you define it, you design it, you test it, and you get feedback from the client, you deploy it, and then you get the feedback, and then okay, now we have few more things. The client keep adding the tasks into the backlog. So simply, it's not the client, but it's the product owner now, who is responsible for the whole product. So he's adding all the tasks in the backlog, and then the same cycle is repeated again. So the development team is only responsible for development, So this cycle, so define, design, test this cycle, and deploy as well. And the product, or let's say product owners, client stakeholders, they are responsible for this backlog, and also to test the application. So like you see, like application is divided into small chunks, and then you get the feedback from the client at the same time, and you satisfy everyone, so you don't have these surprises. um so this was waterfall versus agile. And then you have scrum. So first of all, scrum and agile are not the same thing. We take them for the same thing, but yeah, in reality they are a bit different. Um, so in Azure DevOps, we use both. We have both possibilities, Agile and Scrum. You have other possibilities as well, because they are just methodologies, and you have just small different difference. So you have in Scrum as well. It's almost follow the same logic. So you have these ceremonies. You have many things in Scrum. So you have these ceremonies: daily Scrum, sprint review, sprint retro, and sprint planning. And these are the ceremonies. You call them ceremonies because they are like events occurring during a sprint, and this is whole sprint. So like this part is whole sprint, and within this sprint you have these ceremonies: sprint retro, sprint planning, daily Scrum, and sprint review. The and so in daily Scrum you just do a stand up, and in that stand up you just talk about what you're going to do today, what you did yesterday, and if you are blocked. Simple. You do it within the team, and the team helps each other. And then once you're done with the Scrum, you start for your day and you do your stuff. And if we go talk about a sprint planning, this is the beginning of your sprint. And sprint planning is simply you plan what you're going to do in the sprint, and you prioritize tasks. You put points on that, and how much time it is going to take. You decide all these things. So um, after you have done this, you are ready to go for the sprint. And generally, I didn't say, but generally sprint is a period of 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks. It can be 2 to 4 weeks, it can be 1 week as well, but that will be too quick to handle all these events and to do all these things. That will be a bit more overhead. But yeah, so sprint can be ideally it is 2 weeks. It can be 4 weeks as well, depending on your structure and your product. After the sprint planning, once your sprint is done, then you have a sprint retro and a sprint review. So sprint retro is simply for the dev team to see what we did well, and what can we do to improve the process. And this is about the process, sprint process they have. So they just look back and see what we could improve, and how we could do things better to improve the team collaboration actually. And a sprint review is different. A sprint review is you review with your product owners and stakeholders. You review your sprint product, what you got in that sprint. So basically you do the demo, and product owners and other stakeholders, they provide you feedback, and you them then you can include that in the next sprint or not, depending on your load. And then basically product owners and stakeholders, they can add your stuff in the sprint backlog here. So sprint backlog is continuously changed by the product owner and his stakeholders, and uh, once your demo is done, then you have you are ready to go to next cycle at the same time. Then you have different roles. I didn't talk about them. You have a scrum master, you have product owner, and you have development team. So development team is only responsible for the development of the product. What they do, they follow this scrum a methodology, and they don't they don't care about other things like yeah, it can be any surrounding problem. They don't care. So then to handle any surrounding problems, the role of scrum master is to help the development team to go smooth in the process and enable them to do best what they like to do the best development. And then the product owner is there to decide or to put the backlog for next 2 3 sprints. So his job is to make it clear about the product, what is required, what they need, and he keeps putting mm, the tasks, the backlog items in the sprint backlog. And then um, so these are the teams inside the Scrum sprint. And then you have these items which are like product backlog, sprint backlog, definition of done, increment, stakeholders, and these three items. So let's see one by one. You have product backlog, which is backlog for the whole product. So and then once your um, sprint is over, after the refinement, you change the product backlog. So with the refinement, what is refinement is like a whole team together look at the products, look at the product backlog, and decide and try to understand actually the problem. Because if development team doesn't know what they are going to do with what they are going to solve, then it's a bit difficult to solve the problem. So they should understand what they are going to develop, and that should be done even before starting the sprint. So that is also a it's not a not an official ceremony, but that's basically a ongoing task. It can be, it depends on the team, it can be ongoing task. So you can keep changing so what happens actually, product owner defines the next sprint backlog, and then he puts some definitions. So definition of done is put there. uh, if it's a bug, then it can be having reproduction steps. If it's a task, then or a feature, so it's the same thing actually. So if it's a feature, then he can put some definitions like what I expect, and when this task can be considered as done. So these are the things he has to think about. And the team development team can look at those definitions. If they don't understand, they ask questions, and then the product owner should provide the answer for those questions. So basically, you understand your tasks, your backlog, your products, what you're going to work on, and even before starting your sprint, so you are clear how much how much work you can do in your sprint. So that's basically to keep the transparency in the team, and also to decide the goals of the team. So you once you start with this scrum, by the end of 2 3 sprints, you can estimate how much tasks your how much points your team can finish. So that's why you try to you keep improving using your sprint retro, and you keep changing it. And then you have this sprint backlog, which is specially for this sprint, which includes backlog items. And those product backlog items further can be divided into tasks. So if there's just only one difference like this. So if it's a Scrum methodology, it's called product backlog items. And if it's a Agile, then it's not a um, product backlog item, but it's a user story. That's the only difference. Okay, and then definition of done. Definition of done is simply when your task is considered to be done. So is it when the product development team delivers the certain feature, or is it when testing passes, or is it when the product is deployed, or is it when the product owner says okay, or is it when everyone agrees? So yeah, in general, what happens, definition of done can be changed by the scrum team, whole scrum team. But in general, what happens, product development team put delivers a feature. They test it themselves actually, but then they put it on some CI/CD pipelines, continuous integration and development delivery, sorry. And then in those pipelines, you might have some predefined tests and other stuff, basically. And then if those tests passes, then the item is available in certain environment, let's say test environment, and that environment can be used by a group of people who are there just for testing, QA, and they can use that. And then if they pass the product, then you can include also product owners to look at the product, the features the new development team in uh, added. And once they say okay, then you might say okay, the product is done, sorry, the feature is done. That's how you can say definition of done. You can change it, you can add more steps in between. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. And already stakeholders, they are not part of the scrum team, but they are looking from outside, and they are in continuous watch of all these things. So simply they are clients actually, or yeah, those who pay you money actually to do your work. And then you have so this is scrum team roles. We already talked about them. Artifacts, these are the artifacts. And then events, these are the ceremonies. So I hope it's clear, but it was very short, but yeah, it can be more interesting. So that's uh, that's it for just your primer. It was just your primer. And then next video is about we to get start with Microsoft Azure DevOps. So we will simply talk about Azure boards on Azure DevOps. So let's stay tuned, and please like, share, and subscribe. See you.